What kind of boats were the Jaredite barges? This is a question that readers of the Book of Mormon wonder about because the description of the barges sounds so strange and impossible. After all, what 19th century American ever heard of a watertight boat that had a hole in the bottom? Usually, what Americans think of when they read the account in the Book of Mormon in Ether is something of a small Noah's Ark made of wood planking. Some other very creative art has been used in the church for years, showing various artist renditions of what they think the barges may have looked like. Most of the art has the barges depicted as some sort of submarine or some barrel-like contraption that could spin in the water. Most of the confusion comes from the fact that the Book of Mormon says that the barges had holes in the bottom, and for most Americans that just does not make sense. But if you understand the barges as an ancient person would have, you'll see that the Book of Mormon's strange barges with holes in the bottom that has seemed so anachronistic to modern readers is actually a bullseye for Joseph Smith and an evidence of his prophetic calling. It's interesting that Nephi's boat was translated as a ship, but the earlier Jaredite barges were translated into English as barges. Joseph Smith was likely familiar with the typical American river barge. They sat low in the water and often had a cabin for freight or passengers, but there were certainly no boats on any American river that was considered seaworthy that had a hole in the bottom. So this type of river barge is probably not the type of barge that the translation of the Book of Mormon means for us to envision. To understand what kind of boats the barges were, we need to look at the text of the record and we need to remember where these people were from. We need to realize that with the Lord directing them, they made 3 different trips. The first trip was from where they were, somewhere in the area of the Tower of Babel, northward into the Valley of Nimrod. The Valley of Nimrod was most likely in what is now modern Turkey or northern Iraq along the Tigris River. The second trip was when, in the Valley of Nimrod, the Lord appeared to the brother of Jared, and the Lord had them go southward. They had to cross rivers, and likely floated down rivers where they could. They built barges then to float across rivers and down rivers. The Lord didn't want them stopping at the sea in the wilderness, so he had them keep going through the quarter where never man has been, which likely refers to the area of the Arabian Peninsula that is still called the Empty Quarter today. Then they stopped at the seashore of the Arabian Sea, which is part of the Indian Ocean. The third trip was when, after 4 years, the Lord chastened the brother of Jared for not continuing, and he told them to build barges like those that they had built before to cross rivers. But this time they would be going out to sea. What kind of barges would they have built then? What kind of material is native to that area of the world and is plentiful? What kind of material have the people in that area of the world traditionally made their boats from for thousands of years? The answer is not trees. That area of the world is sparse of trees, and trees are not typically used for boats to cross rivers with. The answer is reeds, and reeds is the most likely material that the Jaredites would have used. The people of the Tigris and Euphrates River, as well as people of the Nile, were expert in making boats from reeds and enhancing them with other natural materials. There are several types of reed boats that were used. There were barges like the Egyptian boat that we saw earlier. There were rafts, there were dual-hulled boats, and there were simple gufas that are basically shaped like baskets that were sealed tight like into a dish with a natural bitumen or tar and a clay similar to the quality and kind that is used in ceramics. The scripture says the barges were the length of a tree, the ends of the boats were peaked, the boats were sealed tight on the bottom, sides, and top, even so much that they could hold water where they were sealed. They were dark inside when the doors and the holes were closed. Therefore, the story of the brother of Jared asking the Lord to light 16 stones that they could use to light the cabins of the barges with, while they would be shut up inside. The barges could be steered, but no mention of a sail is made. The barges were strong because they could withstand being swamped by waves, but they were watertight, which brought them back up again, likely because they were buoyant, being full of air. So what do I think these reed boats look like? Remember, the most confusing part of the Book of Mormon story about the boats is that they had a hole in the bottom. I don't believe that if Joseph Smith were faking a story that he would have written a hole into the bottom of a boat. That idea is not from his early 1800s experience. But I think the Book of Mormon's description is right on point, being similar to reed boats used anciently. I think the barges were a dual-hull reed boat that would have looked something like this from the side. They were likely steered from inside or outside the cabin with a single rudder. The cabin was sealed tight with bitumen tar and ceramic quality clay. This type of configuration also could allow that if the cabin of the barge did not take up all of the length of the boat, that there could have been a place to walk outside and sit on the deck in good weather. Also, you can see that with this type of configuration that the barges could have been tied together during rough seas so that the 8 barges stayed together. From the front view, this dual hull configuration would allow there to be a hole in the bottom that was above the water line that could be stopped up to keep it watertight during rough seas. This idea gives a much more plausible meaning to the Lord's instructions to stop up the holes when water was coming in and to unstop the holes when they needed air. The hole in the bottom of the boat could also have been used for waste disposal or even for fishing. My theory is that these barges were watertight enough and sturdy enough that they could venture out into open water, but they could also be maneuvered to shore with oars if need be. Although the story does not mention stopping for supplies, the story does say that the Jaredites were at sea for 344 days, which likely would have required more supplies, but possibly not due to the many resources of the sea. In any case, my theory is that they were to follow the ocean currents down the east coast of Africa and around the Horn. The seas are always rough around the Horns of Africa and South America. The Lord knew then that their barges needed to be strong, watertight, and buoyant. Thus, under his guidance, they used the materials that they were familiar with, and they built barges of the kind that they had used to cross rivers. But this time they used them to travel across seas and stay together. From these modern images I'm showing you, you can see that the reed boats are still in use today. They are still used all over the world, although modern technologies obviously predominate. It's interesting that reed boat technology was not only known in the old world of the Middle Eastern and Asian cultures, but was also used in the Americas anciently. The most widely known use of reed boats to modern day are the reed boats of Lake Titicaca in Peru. The most well-known evidence that reed boats are capable of long ocean journeys is that of Thor Heyerdahl's Ra II expedition, in which he sailed from Africa to Barbados in a papyrus reed boat. It's interesting that possibly Thor Heyerdahl's route on the Ra II expedition is likely similar to the route of the Jaredites once they had cleared away from Africa. There have been other adventurers make similar trips in reed boats since then. To conclude, the Book of Mormon's strange description of ancient barges is, after all, not so strange once we open our minds to how the ancient people of the Mesopotamian area built their boats from reeds and used natural bitumen tar and clay to seal them up. The descriptive phrases used in the scripture, such as the barges were, quote, sealed tight like unto a dish, unquote, and that the barges, quote, sat upon the water like a fowl, unquote, take in beautiful, correct imagery in our minds when we envision a dual hull reconfiguration which allows for all of the points mentioned in the Book of Mormon, even for the hole in the bottom of the boat. To me, this is a strong corroboration that the Book of Mormon is indeed an ancient record. Thank you for watching.